Right, we're back on live, and we've got 0 viewers at the moment. So I would like,
Surprise.
I'd like Michael just to re-engage and just fill us in on the latest news about the bubble, the single person's bubble. I found that quite a surprise. It was a gift really from Mr. Ashford on the press conference yesterday.
Indeed, it's certainly good news for many local people who are living alone. It is nice that has been decriminalised hugging. Yesterday or the day before rather, if I had hugged another human being, then that would have been a criminal offence punishable by, I guess, 4 weeks in prison. Whereas that has now been decriminalised within a bubble. And it is really good news that a lot of people who are living alone will now be able to, perhaps see a boyfriend or a girlfriend, or see a brother or a sister, or see a mother or father, or see another household. And so I think it is prudent and it's good to reduce the risk of other harms beyond just coronavirus. And I think that when we've got to remember here that when we are trying to combat the coronavirus, we need to measure and offset anything we do against other potential harms and risks. So good on the government for listening to the public. The next step will be to decriminalise people who sit outside alone.
And rightly so. But Michael, you're a guy living alone. What's the next step? Who do you connect with? How do you make that choice?
Well, I did see that a number of new people have seemingly registered on Tinder yesterday, so maybe that's one avenue. But we'll see how we go. But different people make different situations and decisions. If you're a key worker, you might want to, and with a child, you might want to arrange to bubble up, as it were, with your parents or the child's grandparents, so that way they can look after the kids in an appropriate and safe manner. Or it could be a friend along those lines, or it could be, I think the point here is that different humans live in different relationships in different situations. So trying to have one size fits all, you can't gather with anyone out who you don't live with. I think that was a bad rule, and I think it's a good rule now.
Okay, just a point on that. So we've got, I think I read something yesterday. There may be up to 10,000 people who live alone on the Isle of Man. Wouldn't it be great if we could cast the net and make sure everyone has got that opportunity to link up? Because I don't see how we can facilitate that. Derek, is that cross your mind?
It's a real problem, and the thing is that by not doing anything, there's problems being stored up. My mum lives alone. Fortunately, she's got a support network of my brother around the corner who pops in and waves at the window, and we sort of work in a bubble with her. But we were joking the other day when we popped round and said, it's lovely to catch up for a talking at, because she doesn't see anybody all day. So it's literally just this outpouring of stuff, feelings and emotions and what's not happening and what's everybody else doing and so on. And you compound that by, you say there are 10,000 people living at home on the island. It's storing up problems. There's no doubt about it. So, where we are now, whatever way anybody wants to look at it on the Isle of Man, going back to a COVID-free existence and some continuity in that is not a really viable situation. For me, what they now need to be looking at is ways of living with this, ways of mitigating risk to people, and actually getting people connected on a social level, because I still say that the long-term legacy from this will be the mental health issues rather than the COVID issues. COVID will eventually burn itself out. So let's get used to living with it and making it better for people that are on their own, and that social connectivity, which is better for their mental health and mental well-being and the physical well-being in real terms.
And it was good to see on the presser yesterday that there's a big focus on mental health. Maybe behind the scenes there's some big noises being made about that, because of course Juan Watterson raised the issue that in Tynwald that there's a big underspend on the mental health budget, which was it was fended off by Mr. Ashford, but we need to really get to the bottom of that. Now, Michael, I mean, you're kind of out and about, gregarious. Are you picking up anything on the radar? about this? Because you look back to the Isle of Man's approach to mental health over the last few years with this horrific, rate of lack of care and suicides and all the headline grabbers. Are you seeing anything yourself? Are you picking anything up?
Well, just to be clear, when we talk about me being out and about, it's obviously I'm subject to the same laws as everyone else, and I mean, annoyingly complicit with them. But the thing I think we need to focus on now is that the future looks to be brighter. In the UK, more than 50% of the adult population have received now at least one dose of the coronavirus vaccine, and here in the Isle of Man, at least 40% of the adult population has received at least one dose of the coronavirus vaccine. So that's a sign of something good. That is sign that there is light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train coming towards us. There is hope and there is opportunity, and so for a lot of that 40% people, they'll be significantly safer, much lower risk of the coronavirus. And as a result, we can expect that those people are very unlikely to die. We have new data coming out of Israel and elsewhere showing that people who have been vaccinated have very low transmission rates. Doesn't stop it completely, but it certainly has a big reduction. And so now that means that we'll be able to move, hopefully very soon, away from this idea of lockdown to protect people into a new world where we are protected by the vaccine. Because the people of the Isle of Man have willingly endured a lot of sacrifice to keep our elderly, vulnerable people alive over the last year. And it's good that they will now be protected by the vaccine going forward, and we'll be able to reopen. We'll be able to reopen families, we'll be able to reopen households, we'll be able to reopen and build better and open stronger.
But the thing is, the question you need to ask here is what does the Manx public want? Do they want the continued Alcatraz existence, or do they want to at least amalgamate with the United Kingdom? Because I'm just looking, there's an article here on BBC News that's just posted 26 minutes ago. COVID, summer holidays abroad, unlikely, warns government advisor. So there's still obviously going to be restrictions around your entry to the United Kingdom, unless you're coming on a dinghy across the English Channel, of course. But the problem is, do you want to be part of that, or do you want to be part of the microcosm of the Isle of Man with real tight border controls and a COVID-free existence? Where's the balance, I suppose? It'd be interesting to get a straw poll from the public in terms of what they think is the right answer. Because for me, had I still been on the island, it would have been reaching breaking point, the fact that I couldn't get to the UK to see family. And I think that's, quite. I picked that up with quite a lot of people.
I think we've
endured a lot of restrictions to keep the vulnerable alive. Now that the vulnerable are protected by the vaccine, it doesn't make sense to continue those restrictions. We need to allow people to see the daughter, like we spoke about a couple of weeks ago, Mel Jane Carr. She has an almost 16-year-old daughter, not seen since she was 14, because she lives across in Cumbria, the daughter. And so it's time to remove those barriers when people are protected by the vaccine, because we just can't pay that cost. It doesn't make sense. It's not fair. There's a lot of young people in their 20s and 30s, very low risk of any serious, harm from the virus itself, have paid a big price. And there becomes an issue of intergenerational fairness, is that the people in the 20s and 30s have sacrificed a lot, some of their years of their prime over the last 12 months to reduce the risk to the vulnerable elderly people on the Isle of Man. And now that the vulnerable elderly people are protected by the vaccine, you've got to be kidding if you're going to keep on imposing these rules and restrictions on us. That doesn't make sense.
No, I agree.
I think you're absolutely right, and certainly the tourism trade, I think they've had time to reflect about this September sort of date for being open for business, when, of course, the UK is going to be a little bit more fluid on travel and so forth earlier than that. And with having this September deadline, you can't actually really prepare. Why not make the deadline in June? And if we're not over into a decent state where we can bring people to the island, then we can move it on. But you can never really move it back. So there's some issues there, and I sense there's a bit of discourse with the public in general. I think people are getting tetchy. They're running out of patience. I mean, you've seen the headlines recently about the Nobles Park 11, or how many are involved, and the exchanges that, well, who's going to make the decision about them being prosecuted? And of course, 2 were in the traps last night, Derek, weren't they? I think that was one of the headlines.
Yeah, I saw that on the Manx radio site there. They were talking about there was 2 locked up. I mean, it's going to continue. I think it's going to get more prevalent. Certainly in terms of what's happened here, is that people are less compliant. There is certainly less enforcement other than for the big gatherings. If somebody's having a hacienda type rave in a warehouse somewhere like that, then those tend to get hit hard. But there is that balance now. I mean, people are making their own informed risk assessments, their own informed judgments, meeting people in safe contexts like outside and stuff like that. The R number is going down. The prevalence in terms of the data dashboards, virtually everywhere it is going down. In some areas it is shown as suppressed. I mean, even Clapham, where that young girl was so tragically murdered the other week. The virus is shown as suppressed in there, which is effectively a suburban area. So we're on the way out of this. But I think I've said every time we've met over the last few weeks, I really think the Isle of Man government actually tales of the UK here and going through this COVID management period which we're entering, where people are vaccinated and protected together. So at least it means that people can decompress, they can get off the island, they can go and visit relatives, they can go for a holiday cottage in the Cotswolds or in Yorkshire or whatever, and just have a bit of time again to reset and actually reappreciate everything that the island's got to offer, because you don't appreciate it more than when you've been off for a few weeks and you come back and you think, God, this is bloody lovely.
Oh, I tell you what, we envy you in some ways, Derek, having that privilege very soon. But I think the patience of the Isle of Man has been tested, certainly with Flip Flop Saturday and the legacies thereon. And we've just got a contribution on the screen from Wendy, so the sound must be loud and clear now. That's reassuring. I'll just read out what she's got to say. It's quite relevant. So Wendy says that with the variants, it appears children are getting very poorly and the vaccine is not presently tested for them. Since they are spreaders, there is that unknown for a few more months. And yes, it could be, in the hands of the kids. And of course, with the flip-flop weekend, we had the schools open, didn't we? And who knows what damage was done there. Michael, what's your perspective there?
Yeah, so it's difficult to predict the future, and so I will not do that. And I do not know what future mutations might arise that might affect children in the past. But what we do need to look at is what has happened to date. And to date, there have been over 500,000 people in the United States of America who have died due to the coronavirus, which is a huge, it's a shocking amount. It's tragic. Every day of Joe Biden's presidency, it's like another September 11 happening many times over. It is horrific and it's terrible. But out of those 500,000 people in the US who have died as a result of the coronavirus, 288 are children. And so that is not zero. It is true it is not zero. But 288 out of 500,000 out of 500,000 is a very small number, and each one of those children are people who had significant and very big comorbidities, and so we need to keep the risk in proportion. In that, it is certainly possible that some children will get sick for a couple of days. It is certainly possible that some children will have the virus but have no symptoms and not develop the disease. But it is also true that there is some chance, and it is a small chance, that some children will be affected in the long term. But we need to recognise that in the American example, where we have the 288 out of 500,000, it is very, very small numbers that have been harmed, and those people who have those significant comorbidity risks require special focused protection in a manner that is, we can't all live under whatever those rules will be, right? That is not a practical way of living for humanity. And so those people need special protection. They need special assistance. That's probably likely to come in the form of vaccines and medical treatment in the fullness of time. And so I guess, for those people, our hearts go out to them, and we should do everything we can to reasonably reduce the risk. But that can't, there will be people who die of all sorts of viruses and all sorts of diseases here in the Isle of Man and elsewhere this year and next year. And we need to keep the risks in proportion.
I think it'd be fair to say if this virus, if it was akin to the one 100 years ago, where it was young men in their 20s being, afflicted by it, it would have a completely different landscape. But I think let's look at the numbers here, and we'll look at, say, how many people die on the Isle of Man, we've mentioned it before, through suicide, through drug overdoses, how many in the last 5 years in motorsport, deaths on the roads. The actual numbers aren't great, and I think once we can protect, like you say, this vulnerable block of the community, I think really we've got to perhaps take a risk and move on. And Derek, you're nodding your head, you can see that.
Yeah. I think the thing is we're now 12 months in. We know what the world looks like under a global pandemic. We know where the vulnerabilities are. The data is there in terms of both national and worldwide deaths. We know who needs protecting. It's a bit like, if you've got a suppressed immune system from cancer and having therapy, you're going to take, whether COVID is playing an active role or not, you're going to take measures and steps to stop yourself getting infections because you're at a high risk. So people are already living under those disciplines and regimes as it is. But it's like everything. I mean, I've had some banking problems since we moved over here and trying to open new bank accounts and this, that, and the other. And a couple of times I've had that. Well, it's because of COVID. Excuse from it. I said, I'm sorry, we've had this for a year now. You're a global bank. You've had a chance to adjust, and you can't keep throwing this because of COVID excuse out. We live in different times. We live in a very much readjusted world, and we now actually need to start to reset, put some new strategies and tactics in place, and let the world open up and get on with it again. Sure, there are going to be national restrictions. I think, as I was saying there before, the BBC reporting that foreign holidays are highly unlikely in the UK. Okay, well, it's a big place still, the United Kingdom. We can move around it freely. We can actually sort of, build the local economy again. And that, as well as the stuff that Michael pointed out there about protecting the vulnerable, means that we can actually just get on with life in general, which would be great, wouldn't it? Well, especially once the sun starts shining.
Speaking of getting on with life in general, we've just got Oliver posted about monitoring traffic on the main road in the south of the island this lunchtime, and we're nearly approaching 100 passers-by in half an hour, which nicely links in. You might notice this. I've got the old cycling kit on, and I've been out for a run round the south this morning, did my hour and a bit, and you know what? I've never seen so many cyclists and people out walking. It was tremendous. So, there is a lot of good coming out of this. People are perhaps getting exercise into their routine. It's got to be a positive. But I don't know whether this headline was a positive this week. Did you see it? Front page of the Times, Priti Patel. It ain't pretty for the Isle of Man, or is it? Asylum seekers being based here or on the Rock in Gibraltar. Michael, what's your take?
Well, the first take is it's fake news. This is the second story this year that the Times has written in intersecting in the Isle of Man. They had their story about train roundabouts under the Isle of Man earlier this year. It is nonsense. It is fake news. In the story itself, it talks about officials, not even senior officials, merely mentioning the Isle of Man in conversation. Now, that is no decision so none of this is real. But, and if we must play along with the media circus, then I guess, that's what we will do. But let us be honest that this is a fake news story from the Times. They've got form on this. It's a second fake news story about the Isle of Man this year. Earlier this year, they wrote about, train roundabouts. Well, trains do not have roundabouts. And, this is all absurd. And so now we have this nonsense story from, what is increasingly a nonsense newspaper.
Well, is it, though? Because, we've got...
Yes, it's fake news. 100%
The Guardian, Financial Times, Mirror, iNews, the London Economic, politicshome.com, iNews, The Guardian, The Times, Evening Standard. There was more than one news gathering agency carrying this story. And
so they all date back to this Times story. The Times story does not quote a single human being. That is an unattributed, anonymous story about some official somewhere in the government mentioning the Isle of Man. It is not real.
Derek, is it an opportunity for the island ban, though? There's not a great deal of business, growing here.
Funny enough, I remember jokingly commenting to the prison governor what an ideal place it would be for rendition flights for the CIA. Carve a wing off to the CIA, bring them in by Learjet in orange jumpsuits, do whatever they needed to do, and then move on. We could have made millions of pounds a year through that, and she didn't think it was necessarily compatible with human rights and this and that. But hey, that's her choice. It's her prison. We joke about these things, don't we? But what I do think comes out of this is, we sort of market the island as wonderful, welcoming place, and we welcome everybody, every creed, colour, sexual orientation. As soon as you mention a few asylum seekers, and let's remember these are people being processed for legitimate naturalisation into the United Kingdom through the asylum process, an internationally recognised process. Oh, we don't want those here, do we? It just sort of brings out that sort of little bit of racism that tends to exist. These are desperate people. You don't come all the way from Syria in the back of lorries and on a rubber dinghy across one of the most dangerous shipping lanes in the world if you ain't desperate, if you don't really want to get here. So I think, there probably is an opportunity. There's loads of different opportunities, isn't there, from wind farms to asylum processing centres that the island could take up, but chooses not to for whatever reason. And in the meantime, we're stuck in the doldrums a little bit. There's no real new big thing on the horizon, as the saviour of the finance sector was maybe 30 years ago. And we rapidly need to find that to make sure the island is sustainable and viable into the future. I think it might have been an opportunity, and also an opportunity to just show how hospitable and caring and compassionate and effective and efficient the island is. I get people are against it, but maybe not dismiss it out of turn.
Well,
I think it would be helpful, boys, to have a good understanding of what an asylum processing centre is. And it appears that this is modelled upon this proposal, or this discussion point is modelled upon what Australia did about 15 years ago when I was working, for various members of Parliament in the Australian Parliament when this was created. And what an asylum processing centre is in this context is essentially a detention centre. It is essentially a large jail, or analogous to a large jail. It is a facility where the asylum seekers are detained. And the reason that a nation might use an offshore processing centre is to ensure that those people are located outside the boundaries of the migration law of the underlying country. So, for example, Australia has established a facility, or did establish facilities in Nauru, which is an independent island, independent nation in the Pacific, and Manus Island, which is part of Papua New Guinea off to the north of Australia. And these islands are technically inhabited, but they have essentially no infrastructure, no resources, and these days their economy is essentially dominated by subsistence fishing. So, for example, Nauru, this might be a little bit too much detail for anyone who's interested in the story, but the economic history of Nauru is that nation, that island is in the middle of the Pacific, and what would happen is over millions of years, birds would migrate through the Pacific, and they would stop and rest on this island. And while they were rested on this island, they would literally, I don't know what the right word is here, but they would shit on this island. And so Nauru was for a long time amassing these large amounts of essentially bird shit. And so what was happening in the 20th century is that those deposits were mined for the phosphates. Those phosphate mines ran out in the 1980s and 1990s. And the result being is there's nothing left on this island, right? And so for them, employing 100 jailers, 100 prison officers, 100 detention guards is a meaningful contribution to their economy, because this place is incredibly poor, it's incredibly remote, and it has no natural resources to speak of. And in addition, because it's an independent nation, it is outside the immigration jurisdiction of Australia. None of this applies to the Isle of Man, and the idea that we would build some sort of detention centre and house however many hundred or however many thousand detainees here in the Isle of Man, so we can hire a couple of hundred prison guards, like that doesn't make sense. None of this story makes sense in an Isle of Man context, which is why this is a fake news story. It's why the Times should be ashamed to run it, and it's why it just makes me so sad, because no one seems to think here about what this actually means.
Well, thank you to Alan, who's contributed on screen, saying, watch Michael's lips, it's fake news, move on, or bring them over on the underwater trains. But I'll ask you, did this come out of thin air? Sometimes you've got to kind of follow the money, haven't you? Really? Did they just pluck the Isle of Man? Has there been a conversation somewhere in the background with someone in government? It must have been hatched somewhere, so watch this space. But of course, something like this could provide benefits to the island if it's dressed up right. It's not going to be like some barbaric, prison camp. Let's just, not beat about the bush. But we'll park that to one side, because there's a few more comments coming in, and I'll just flick them over. So we've got Wendy on again first. I'll just read this out. Just throwing a spanner into the works. There isn't enough data on the vaccine to know how long the protection is after the jab, or whether it's effective against the VOCs at present. Yes, so it could be we're getting jabbed every year. I'll just move over to Jay. Right. You forgot the significant impact of long COVID on the young. There are examples on the island of Guillain-Barré syndrome, and in one case paralysis requiring a wheelchair for people in their 20s. Well, that's true. We're not hearing too much about long COVID, really. It's not in the public domain. I hear some anecdotal stuff. Of course, I had the thing myself, and I keep telling myself I'm still not 100%. Bod has come on and said, where there's guano, there's money. Guano. So that's the term that we're looking for, which is bird shit. And there's lots of bird action in your hedgerows and gardens and public parks at the moment. It's spring, there's nest building, and there's a lot of fruitiness going on in the air. And I would recommend anyone who's a follower of Twitter is to tune in to the Wakefield Peregrine site, which is fantastic. It's the top of Wakefield Cathedral, and there's a box with a camera in. And you've got Mr. and Mrs. Peregrine just getting it on at the moment. And every day, Mr. Peregrine, he comes back with a gift. And it's going to be some little garden bird, like a goldfinch or something. It's utterly barbaric, but, enthusing at the same time. Now, speaking of the garden, Derek, you've just bought a Tesla-style mower. Just very quickly, give us a quick review. You've scalped the 100-acre lawn this morning.
Yeah.
How did it go?
Yeah. Well, on the major estate, which I used to own on the Isle of Man, I used to have a Husqvarna robot mower, which if you've got lots of grass to cut, I would thoroughly recommend it. I've got a lot less grass on this one. I've got about 220 square meters or so. Looking for a mower. Did want to go down petrol again. The wife wanted something a little bit more maneuverable and accessible for her as well. And after a bit of research, I came up with the one that B&Q sell, the Erbauer mowers. 2 batteries, 36 volts, a turbocharger, which has got a big cooling unit and this, that, and the other. And I tell you something, it shows how far battery technology has come on. This thing did 3 cuts, and then I swapped the batteries into the hedge trimmer that I bought as well with it. And I've cut about 200 meters of hedges with it as well, with both batteries to decharge them. It really is well worth a look. It's a proper steel deck machine, and people who know me know how fussy I am about grass and lawns and cutting stuff like that. It was a really, really big step forward, really, for us to go electric. So I think it just shows the way the world's going, in terms of both the sustainability side of things and where cars are going and so on, and how important it's going to be.
How much? How much? That's what we want to know.
It's 398 quid.
Really?
Oh,
blimey.
which I didn't think was that bad, to be honest. I mean, I'd have paid for the equivalent petrol mower, maybe another Husqvarna LC or something like that. That would have been 375 quid. But this one, I think the hedge trimmer was 100 quid. The strimmer was 79 quid. The little chainsaw that you can buy that goes with it is 160 quid. All the batteries slot on and off. No fuel, no servicing, all that sort of stuff. No petrol around the back of the shed waiting to go up like a Roman candle. It's really interesting. But of course, it brings us back to that sort of sustainability issue in terms of the pressure on the grid, the more people that are plugging in, and the electricity strain on the infrastructure, the need to build more wind, the need for reinvestment in nuclear and so on. And these are things that the Isle of Man really need to look at here and now. That gas power station ain't going to be viable forever. So what do we do? Do we go down the route of one of these new Rolls-Royce small nuclear stations, which would probably do the job, a great test bed for it, or put a massive wind farm in? I think a lot of people would like to see answers for the way that's going, because again, it's good news stories for the island if they're proactive about it, and just getting a little bit ahead of the curve with where things need to be.
Well, it's making it affordable, I guess, and maybe you could get Mrs. Flint an electric cement mixer for other duties you've got planned. Who knows? But I mean, Michael, I'd love to have an electric car on the island, but I simply couldn't afford one. It's not reachable. You can't get a grant to purchase one. You can't get a grant to insulate your house to any meaningful level, or solar panels. And I just saw on Josem Watterson's Twitter, he's been quite active recently, fair play to Josem, and he's talking about there's 50 boiler installations going in, all on fossil fuels. Do you think we could be doing any better?
Well, these things require costs and trade-offs, and so ultimately taking money from taxpayers to pay for these things for taxpayers doesn't, it's a circular machine, and so that we got to be mindful of that. I think that as the years progress, we will see we are very close to a tipping point whereby electric cars become cheaper than internal combustion cars. Different analysts suggest that it might be 2023, it might be 2024. And once it becomes cheaper to buy an electric car than to buy a petrol or a diesel-powered car, then I suspect that things will change very, very quickly, and people will just go for that.
Well, I've got Wendy just posted that Iceland has made themselves into an ecotourism mecca. Why not Isle of Man follow their model? And that's pure gold, isn't it? We profess to be the biosphere, and yet we haven't got much more to show for it. I think, Iceland, with all its beauty and volcanic activity, I think something's gone off this morning, hasn't it, Derek? But the one that shut the world down back in 2010's gone off again, and there's been some suspension of air traffic over Iceland. I mean, it's fairly irrelevant at the moment, isn't it? Because nobody's going anywhere in any real numbers. So it's not going to have the same global impact as last time. But this is crucially important, because I was quite a critic of this biosphere stuff, because it's meaningless. It's absolutely meaningless unless you have a committed program to the sustainability of the island as well. And everything is just virtue signaling. There's no investment going into green issues other than paying the wages of this climate change team that doesn't seem to be achieving an awful lot. And people get tired of it. Let's see some positive changes. It'd been great if the ferry had gone full plug-in hybrid or something like that. We're not really seeing a huge amount of innovation in an island which really needs the good news stories pumping out every single week to keep its position on the global scale up there in the top 10. Michael, are there any good news stories?
I think the good news story is the vaccine is rolling out. I was down there yesterday, helping out and seeing younger people. But I've got to say one thing is that back in January, when there were the very oldest and members of our community were down there, the 90-year-olds and above, there were a huge volume of very kindly donated baked goods. It had seemed that there were a bunch of people going down there, getting their vaccinations and donating chocolate cakes. They were donating carrot cakes, all for the wonderful nurses. It did drop off as the 70-year-olds went through, but now seems to be a bit of a spike again as people in this lockdown are doing a little bit of baked goods. So if you are going down to your vaccine, consider doing a little bit of baking the night before. Those nurses are working hard. Those porters are working hard. So feel free to take down a cake or whatever, because it'll be very, very kindly and gratefully appreciated.
I'm surprised they haven't got their own patisserie chef in a purpose-built kitchen on the cost of the things down there, but we won't really go into that, because you look in the UK, I think that there are millions now that have been vaccinated in school halls with curtains, and looks all very primitive to what we've got, but it's done and that's it, and the programme is rolling out. I've got Wendy on again, and she is actually saying we could be a world leader in so many innovations as it's an incubator for change. And Wendy, we agree with you wholeheartedly. So that's been great to get some commentary and involvement from our guests today after our slow start with the sound, but I think we're coming through loud and clear. So I think there's a lesson there, isn't there, Mike? Check your equipment before you go into action.
Well, I thought we could hear each other, but anyway, it's what's done is done. I think a former manager of mine, Eric, he did comment to hear us. So that's depends on your perspective.
Oh, and he's just come in. He has just come in. Eric, we need to be the Isle of Trial and invest in the infrastructure to support the testing of innovative new products, platform and tech. Well, that sounds great. But don't folk go to Silicon Valley, to California, to, trial their kit? How does that work?
Well, I think there's a good opportunity to do a lot of these sort of things because it has a whole lot of benefits for the people of the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man was a global leader in the 3G, mobile phone technology. There's been great opportunities to do these things. And one of the things that I think it would be particularly good for is to enable and to grow dynamic, rewarding careers for the people of the Isle of Man. It'd be great to see our children who might go off for study or for work for a little bit elsewhere come home and to build rewarding, dynamic careers here on the Isle of Man.
And Derek, you've seen what could have been, and you're away from it now, and we had it in the palm of our hands, didn't we?
Yeah, we do every time, and there's lots of opportunities. I remember when there was a plan to electrify Israel. Some forward-thinking guy came up with that. It didn't come to anything. It was probably a bit ahead of its time. That every household had an electric vehicle. These are the sorts of things where the Isle of Man could really steal a march and do something brave and hugely innovative. I don't know. It's always been for me the land of missed opportunities, and I hope that it actually tips over that point, maybe after September, with a new administration, and it does actually start to seize the day on some of these things that are on the horizon. It's all there for the taking. It just needs a little bit of force and vision to make it happen.
If you look at the submissions from the likes of Rob Mercer and the MLC colleagues, Kate Lord-Brennan, and I'm sorry, there's one name that slips me. It's almost like they've realised they've got a voice now, isn't it, after a couple of years. And when they talked about the climate bill, they're almost scoffing, really, at how badly our government has performed, and really there's very little progress, and certainly on the agenda for change in this election in September 21, there's going to be an absolute hunger to see action. Now, I'm just going to pick up on a comment that's come in before, and it's from, I tell you what, from Charles Price, and it came in earlier on, and he's come back again, and apparently it's the Animal Welfare Bill in 2021, and there is a recommendation to fill out the survey to Finn's Law, which is on the government site. Now, there's something that's interesting, really. I've just picked up on this. We are a third world country regarding the protection of our service animals. So, Charles, if you'd like to elaborate on that sometime. but it's not something I'm acutely aware of. Michael?
Yes. Yeah, so what the story there is that service animals, so that is animals that are prison or police dogs or equivalent, are treated as essentially property. And so if you call and so Finn is the name of a police dog in the UK who was injured in the line of duty, and was when he was attacked by in the line of service. This dog, the penalty for the offender was akin to criminal damage, so akin to breaking a window. And so what Charles is talking about there is about introducing Finn's Law to the Isle of Man. And so the Isle of Man government has recently proposed their animal welfare bill, which incorporates or gives actually, and so I want to be very clear about this, it does not fully incorporate Finn's Law, but rather what the Isle of Man government has done is that they have introduced legislation that will allow them to maybe sometime, possibly, hypothetically in the future, have a chance of maybe, possibly incorporating UK law into the Isle of Man law. And so this is, to be frank, it is a piece of lazy, weak source legislation. Rather than creating proper Manx law for the Isle of Man, they are merely empowering the minister and the department to copy parts of UK law at an unspecified, possible, maybe, hypothetical future date. And it is a very underwhelming piece of legislation. It has been on the agenda now for 5 years and 1 month since Tynwald reported on this situation. And waiting for 5 years for this piece of legislation, I think will be very underwhelming to a lot of animal welfare advocates and also people who just want animals to be treated fairly. So things such as electric shock collars, things such as the cropping of animal ears, things such as Finn's Law, as we spoke about. These ideas are something that are mainstream and normal and have been mainstream and normal in the UK and other Western nations for some time now. And so this animal welfare bill, well, I guess it's a step in the direction, but it is a very small step, and it is, frankly, a piece of lazy, weak source legislation.
Well, thank you, Charles, for putting that on the script for us today. Now, we've had back to the Isle of Trial. I do chuckle at this. This is from...
I do like the idea of the Isle of Trial when it is illegal for me to be outside.
Well, you like this. The only Isle of Trial should be the CM and HE, no names, on trial for how they've handled this third lockdown. Arrogant shambles, when are they going to be held to account? And the public has got an appetite, haven't they, for seeing some, like an apology or some sort of action, or
I don't think so. I don't think so.
It's a lumpy carpet, is it, Derek?
No, it's always been a land of lumpy carpets. That's part of the sort of, beautiful terrain that the Isle of Man has. The public aren't interested. This will be forgotten. I mean, this is why they're pumping hard to get back to a COVID-free environment so they can run the elections in September with a bit of jingoism. And you'll see the same faces back in, and you'll see another 5 years of no change. I'm telling you, the public aren't interested. There's only a small microcosm of those of us who engage on Twitter and have a bit of a jousting match with this. Are the likes of us who make some political comment. The rest don't give a monkeys because they have a very comfortable existence on the Isle of Man, a very simplistic existence on the Isle of Man, and they're happy with that. And until the day when it happens where actually taxes go up or things really start to bite hard, the public aren't interested. They really aren't.
Michael, I've got the opposite view. I think the public do care, and I think they've seen a lot in the last year, and they're at their wits' end.
Yeah, some do and some don't. There's across the population of 85,000 people, some people care passionately, some people don't. For a lot of people, they have simply much more important things in life than politics. They need to, picking up kids up from school, or getting the dinner on for the family, or hanging out the washing, or
it passes them by.
Exactly, yeah, but they're not allowed to do that. They're not allowed to do that. They've had that taken away from them, and some may argue, would say that it's been the careless actions where, let's face it, we're surrounded by water. This was no kind of masterful exercise. It was just a case of close the borders and keep an eye on what's going on. And that hasn't happened. And now we're paying the price the third time, the third lockdown. It's extending beyond what we'd ever imagined, and our freedoms have been curtailed.
It is, but we then need to translate that into action. In the by-election last year, I was the only candidate to have in their manifesto talking about increasing testing to reduce the risk of a second lockdown. And I remember I was interviewed by James Davis, who's now hosting these government question and answer sessions every now and then. And he said, "Oh, are you sure that the Alaman government is going to impose a second lockdown?" I said, "Yeah, that's what they said. That's what their plan was." But no one cared. It doesn't matter. And so I think we need to recognise that we need to translate from policy ideas into action at the ballot box. And I hope that the people of the Isle of Man do quiz and do care deeply about policy. And some people will. And hopefully we can get a focus that gets away from this reality TV show, personality-driven things of Paul Moulton versus Howard Quayle on the Daily Briefing or whatever it is, and move to a conversation of ideas rather than merely stuck in the personality and reality TV show nonsense.
I think there has been some goodness where it's been identified that the brownfield sites need looking at for housing development and regeneration. Yeah. I'm liking that. I'm hoping that it'll be more of an independent body, not too much government led. But I really think that we've got so many opportunities, and I'll tell you, I spoke to the delivery driver who dropped in a parcel at the house yesterday. And I said to him, I said, "How many parcels are you delivering a day?" And he goes, "Oh, easy 100, maybe more." "Well, how many vans are in the company?" And he said, 40. And they're all doing the same on the island as we speak. And he goes, "Yeah." So that's one company. And then we're talking, well, you've got the post office, say you've got other 3-4 delivery companies. You're looking at 10,000 transactions a day, deliveries. And what effect is that having on the shops in Douglas Town Centre? We can see, and surely we've got to devise a mechanism where we're going to have to say, this area isn't going to work. Can we not transform it into some town housing, some low cost, some public housing, something that can give our young people a chance to buy a property?
Yeah, it would be nice, but people like the Trafalgar Hotel, so hence it's been protected. Some people like the Newson's building, which is literally crumbling, for a couple of 100 metres down the road here. So it's going to stay as it is, and what are you going to do?
Derek?
No, I agree with Michael. There is this entrenched attitude. It really does need a sort of shock and awe, minor thermonuclear device approach to try and.
I'm going to go that far.
No, I honestly think it's that there needs to be something on a shock and awe basis to to wobble the Isle of Man on its axis and actually start it spinning in the opposite direction. Because nothing ever changes. These things we know and we can see hold the place back continue to happen. These harebrained decisions, whether it's the resurrection of the horse trams, whether it's this bus sort of, I don't know, this bus mecca that seems to be created under the guises of Ian Longworth. The inability to sort of grasp the green issues other than plant a few trees, which make a net difference of the carbon footprint of 3 people, 10 people, or something like that. It goes on and on and on, and it's heartbreaking. But you literally do have to shrug your shoulders, and until there is some major apocalyptic event that actually changes the face of history in the course of time or whatever, that's what you're stuck with. And that's why I am not hopeful for major change come September. I thought September 5 years ago was the sea change, the brave new dawn, the passing of something, a moment in time. And it didn't happen. It was just pretty unbelievable.
Apparently, Derek is correct, says one of our contributors on the screen. Far too much apathy on the island, and politicians know it, and more worryingly, exploit it for all it's worth. Only a few of us give a shit. It's why less people vote. But I think we have had the apocalyptic moment. It was a pandemic. We don't even recognise what the financial impact will be. I was speaking to someone the other day, and apparently it's netted off. We're no worse off now than what we were, say, 5 years ago, which is an encouraging. It's anecdotal. It's. I'm not seeing it in any balance sheet, but that is a very nice thought. Try and think what we've achieved over the last 5 years, and I'll urge anyone to listen to the Tynwald Select Committee broadcast, which was yesterday. It must be on Hansard, it must be on Listen Again, and just listen to Chris Robertshaw tear apart those that were in front of the mic about the Douglas Promenade, and then coming after that, the bus vanning debacle. So I'll park that one with you, but it's quite enlightening and really gives an insight into where we are politically and really on how matters are planned. But anyway, that's something for your perusal over the weekend. So we're just coming up to 50 minutes. Michael, I've got a question for you. Tuna, cans of tuna, is that a favourite of yours?
I've had the odd can of tuna. I feel like I'm about to walk into something awkward here.
No, not at all. Not at all.
Okay, so
I've got quite a fancy for it at the moment, and I'm just thinking like how you serve it up. Do you mix it in with salad cream, onion, black pepper, lemon juice, chutney?
I think I last had a can of tuna during the first lockdown last year. I just had it on toast. It was nothing. I don't know. Why do you ask?
Oh, well, I've got a bit of a tuna addiction at the moment. I'm trying to lose a bit of weight, been doing a bit of cycling, so I just need to lighten it up. So any suggestions out there, please post them. Anything to do with a can of tuna, and it's all going to be sensible. Degsy?
No, I'm all for a bit of mayonnaise and, like you say, a few herbs and spices in it. It'd be lovely. I'm just wondering, Michael, have you actually got through that pasta mountain that was in your kitchen when you were stockpiling before any of us knew that there was going to be a lockdown last time? I remember visiting your there's a Josem Castle of Peace, and there's this huge pasta collection. You remember that, Jed?
Oh, loved it. Ahead of his time.
What was going on? And Josem knew long before anybody else was stockpiling bog rolls that there was a storm coming. A very wise man.
Absolutely.
Treasure him, Isle of Man people. He has wisdom beyond his years.
And the question is, Michael, is the bubble. How happy are you?
I'm happy. I'm looking forward to it. We'll see what happens and sort it all out in coming days.
Lovely. Well, and that's from now, isn't it? Yeah. There wasn't like a deadline. It's got to be from midnight or anything like that.
I think it's immediately available, but I haven't looked into the legislation or anything in that detail. But I gather from the conversation, from the announcement yesterday, that yes, people who live alone are now allowed to see one other household, it appears.
So it's just one. It's one.
Yeah, that's right. So you can't, I'm the description by the government in the press briefing wasn't the clearest, but I think that's right. Don't rely on us for legal advice. Don't sue us when you get arrested for something.
So hang on.
And now that
hang on. So how long does this last? Is it like you make one choice and that's it? Or...
I believe so.
Choose wisely, people. You're going to be stuck with them.
Well, keep us posted, Michael, on how that one went. We're intrigued, and
if he's not here next Tuesday, we know that it went wrong and he's been locked up. So
yeah,
so now you can go see another household, but if you cannot sit outside by yourself in a park or anything like that. That's the next step of decriminalisation.
Well, it's simple. It's simple. The new defence to anything, if you might end up in court, is it was simply a misunderstanding. So there we go. And Derek, you're going to be recharged for another lawn session maybe later. Some stripes?
No, I've done my lawn cutting for the weekend. I have the Saturday Telegraph, which normally takes me till Wednesday to get through. I've got some prep to do for my new position next week. I'm just starting to ease myself into that with some online sessions with UCLan. So a busy week ahead. It's all exciting stuff.
And thank you to our contributors this afternoon. It was great, and we value your patience at the beginning of Skeetnet, where we had a bit of a sound disaster, but we recovered, I think, quite well. So we'll catch up again in the next week or so. Subscribe, share, and get in touch if you want to get on board. Adios.